Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and welcome to video 1 of my 2016 Christmas card series. It's been a couple years since I've done this series, had so many requests for it, so let's get it started. So I'm starting with some Gansai XL watercolor paper that I had cut down to 7 inches by 4 7/8 inches. And then I'm lining it up in my paper cutter and using the groove there to score it at 3.5. So these are top folding 4-bar size cards. So they're 3.5 inches tall by 4 7/8 inches wide. So once I was done scoring them, I'm going to use my Misty stamping tool for this because I want to make sure it's centered. And this is also a great way if you want to mass produce like a card like this, the Misty just makes everything so much easier. So I treated the watercolor paper first with my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm lining up the Merry Christmas script stamp from Simon Says Stamp. And once I've got that lined up, I'm inking it with Simon Says Stamp clear ink. First Mark ink would also work. It's just personal preference. I just really like the Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink. So I inked it up, I stamped it, and I did this twice. Just because this is watercolor paper, it's got a little bit of texture. I wanted to make sure this was stamped perfectly. So I inked it up and stamped it twice, and then I'm going to remove this from the Misty, and then I'm going to coat it with some detail white embossing powder and just pouring that over my coffee filter. So made sure that the sentiment was completely coated with the embossing powder, poured it over a couple times. Since it's the focal point of my card, I want to make sure it's perfect. And then I let my heat tool heat up a bit first, just so that the embossing powder melts faster so it doesn't warp this as much, especially when basically this is all one layer. I don't want to warp it too much because you're not going to be adhering it, you know, where you can adjust with some foam tape to get everything flat. So I did that twice. I could have done it 20 times. Like, this sort of a style of card and just everything so easy to mass produce, but I only went with 2 for today. That's all I had time for. So I stamped and embossed it the 2 times and then wiped off any extra that anti-static powder. And then I'm just using a hardboard here and some painter's tape, and I wanted to make sure the painter's tape wasn't too sticky because I don't want it tearing at this, because I'm not going to be cutting this down or die cutting this watercolor paper at all since this is my card base. So I just press it against my skin. You could put it on your pants and peel it up. It just makes it less sticky. And I'm going to tape both these down to the same hardboard, just kind of back to back here, just to save on some space and get everything completely taped as flat as possible. And then I got out my Gansai Tambi watercolors, and I'm actually only using 1 from this entire set. It's the number 50. It's that kind of aqua, opaque sort of aqua color. Love this color. So I first applied some clean water with just a wide Ranger brush. And then I'm picking up that watercolor and just applying it over top and letting it do its thing. I fiddle with it a bit just because I want it to look, I don't know, it's somewhat messy. I don't want brush strokes to appear in it. So kind of fiddle with it a bit and just making sure that it's completely surrounding all of the words here so that you can see it clearly. So I did that to the first one, and then I did the exact same thing to the second one, just applying clean water and then putting the watercolor on top of it, and also making sure that's why I chose the Gansai Tambi, because these are more, I've said it before, these are almost in between a gouache and a watercolor. Like very much close to a gouache, whereas they're more opaque. So it's really perfect for something like this. And this color especially is just fabulous. So I applied a rather heavy dose of it, as it were, just to make sure that I didn't want to do more than 1 layer. I wanted to keep these simple. So I let it completely air dry rather than speeding up with my heat tool. And then I'm putting it in my splatter cubby here. And I just took a couple pieces of paper towel. You could use scrap paper, whatever, just to protect the parts of the cards here that were sticking out, because I didn't want to get splatter on those. I wanted those to be clean. And I'm just picking up the watercolor with one of the other brushes from this Ranger brush pack that I like to use and just splattering this on top of this watercolor. It's completely dry, because if you did this while it was still wet, the splatter would just fade into the rest of the watercolor and you wouldn't get the effect you want. And then same thing, let that dry, and then I'm able to peel off all the tape. And by removing some of the sticky from the tape in the beginning, it made this peel off perfectly, so it didn't peel the paper at all, like the watercolor paper. It just came off cleanly. So peel off all of that tape, and then I've got both my pieces here. And to finish off the insides of them, I'm going to use my Misty again. I wouldn't if I was only making 1 card, but for, making multiples or mass producing or anything like that, this is where it comes in so handy. I'm using one of the sentiments from the Inside Holiday Greetings set. So I'm going to get that lined up first on the inside of this card, and then I'm going to shut the door of the Misties to pick that up. And then I'm inking it up with Simon Says Stamp Slate ink. And again, this is also where the Misty's good because I'm stamping on watercolor paper. I'm stamping a finely detailed sentiment. I didn't stamp it perfectly the first time, so I can just ink it up the second time and stamp it again so it is perfect. And then I can just remove this card, put in the second one, and stamp it again without having to line anything up. So if I was doing 10 of these, 20 of these, whatever, I just do one after the other and get this done so quickly. And same thing, they don't stamp perfectly the first time on the watercolor paper, so I can just ink it up a second time, stamp it, and it's good to go. So I did that, and then there's this flourish little stamp in that set. So I lined that up below the sentiment, and I grabbed Simon Says their Mint Candy ink, which is really close in color to that Gansai Tambi Watercolor, so it's just perfect. So stamped that flourish, and again did it twice, and then removed that card from the Misty and did the exact same thing to the second card. So really, really simple, really easy. So got these into place with, and then just held it in place with my magnets, inked up the flourish, closed the lid of the Misty, did it a second time, and it's done. So technically you could stop here. Technically, you know, especially if you were doing a ton of them, but you guys know me. And I have a ton of sequins, and I had to just add a little embellishment. If I was doing tons of these, I wouldn't add this step at all. Plus with like mailing and all that, because you're gonna have to add, you know, a little bit of foam or something just to make sure the sequins don't get popping off in the mail. And I had started with, I was gonna use the Pretty Pink Posh Sparkling Clear Mix, and you could see them there. They were too harsh. They didn't go, in my opinion, with these cards. So instead I grabbed Pretty Pink Posh Marshmallow sequins, and I have the 6 and the 4mm. I just kind of sprinkled them rather randomly on both of these cards and just adhered several of them with my multi-medium matte adhesive. So got those adhered and then let them dry, and that finished off my cards. So I will have links below the video to my blog post with all the pictures. I will have links to all the supplies used. All that info is in the description box below the video, so check that out if you're interested. And then at the end I will have links to a couple other Christmas cards I've made in previous years. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.